Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us here today. My name is Fabiana Bacchini. I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation. Every Monday and Friday, we are doing Facebook Lives, interviewing clinicians and all healthcare professionals and parents from across Canada and some people from all over the world to bring the latest information on COVID-19, but also to discuss different aspects of prematurity and also other issues that families might be having at this time. So today is Sunday and it's Father's Day here in Canada. Happy Father's Day to all dads at home. And today I have here with me Kojo Mensah, who is the father of twin boys, Michael and Myles, born at 27 weeks gestation. They spent a total of 100 and 151 days respectively at Mount Sinai's hospital's NICU, and they were discharged in the summer of 2017. Kojo works for the government of Ontario and resides in north end of the Greater Toronto area with his twin boys and wife Chantel. Beyond family and work, Kojo is a sport and recreation enthusiast. Kojo, welcome and thank you so much for joining us here today on Father's Day, and happy Father's Day to you.
Thank you, Fabiana. Thank you for having me.
So I will start asking you about your journey, how your babies end up in the NICU. Walk us through a little bit of your journey when Chantel was pregnant with the twins. Was it a high-risk pregnancy? Did you expect to deliver early? So guide us through that moment in your lives.
Sure thing. Yeah, that was the winter of 2016, December 2016. My wife Chantel was about 5 months along. We went for a routine checkup with the doctor to see how everything was going, routine ultrasound, and they found, without getting into all the details, they found that it was high risk and a good chance of a premature birth would happen. So once that happened, we were taken away to Mount Sinai Hospital, and my wife was on bed rest for almost about a month, and the boys came at the end of January. So that was a wild ride at that point in time. We didn't know, we're first-time parents. We didn't know what to expect, and it was kind of nerve-wracking, to say the least. And when we got to the hospital, we got settled in, and I'll never forget that night, the first night, I think we were there in the middle of the night. Doctors were doing rounds, and one of the doctors came in and asked us a pretty unnerving question. So they said, look, if your babies come at 23 weeks, 22 weeks, whatever it is, there was a certain threshold, and they said, we need to know if you want us to resuscitate or not. And we had to answer that question. And they said, well, you don't have to tell us right this minute. You can tell us in the morning, but we need to know pretty soon so they know what to do. And we talked about it, and we said, no way, we're not gonna let the babies go. If they come early, then we're gonna deal with it. So we said, resuscitate, no questions asked. And my wife was able to hang on bed rest for another 4 weeks, and they came at 27 weeks on the dot. So we did a lot of our own homework and research, and we found that 27 weeks was actually getting to the safe zone. So, it wasn't perfect, but we felt pretty good about it when she reached 27 weeks.
Right. Were you in the delivery room with her?
Not at first. They didn't let me in. They had to get her set up and everything, and then they got me in a gown and a cap and everything, and I was just waiting there like a nervous father to be on my own. I saw another dad in the hallway. It looked like he was about to go through delivery experience with his wife as well, and we kind of just acknowledged each other, and then I was called in, and my wife was actually not with it. She went without an epidural in the initial stages, and they gave it to her at kind of the last second, thank God. And she was rock solid through the whole process, and I was just trying to be there for support. And the first baby came out. We didn't know. We had a bet with each other whether it was going to be 2 boys, 2 girls, a boy and a girl. And I bet a boy and a girl. She bet 2 boys. So mommy knows best, because it came out as 2 boys. And they looked pretty healthy when they came out. I was surprisingly calm for the whole thing. And I think that translated to her because she was also calm as well. And, you know, they showed us quickly what the babies look like, and that just took them away pretty quickly. So it wasn't like a normal birth where the baby gets to lie on the mother's chest. So they were gone right away to get them hooked up on the ventilators and in the isolates and everything. Um,
And
yeah.
so how was for you when you first saw them in the NICU? Because certainly that's not the way any of us want to be welcomed into parenthood, into an ICU where the babies are all hooked up to machines and the alarms and that smell of the soap. So what was your reaction seeing the boys in, I guess, in incubators because they're still 27 weeks?
I think my initial feeling was kind of helplessness, and I didn't feel like a father right away because it didn't get to hold them. We didn't get to see them right away. We saw them the next day. She delivered in the middle of the night, and we saw them the next day in maybe it was like early evening or so. So we didn't get to see them right away. And yeah, it was the following evening. And I remember looking at, I think it was Myles, or both of them actually, and their chests were just heaving up and down, right? Like they were really working hard to breathe. And you feel pretty bad. And like I said, you don't feel like a parent. You're just in survival mode right away. And you kind of feel helpless. So it wasn't a very good feeling, but like I said, my wife and I, we did a lot of research ahead of time. So we were reading a lot about premature birth and looking at pictures and videos. So when we saw them, we had already seen those images before. So it wasn't a complete shock. So I think that research ahead of time actually helped us quite a bit to be calm and to know what we were getting into. But it didn't take away the feeling of feeling helpless, and you want to help your child, right? And you can't do much at that point. So it was a interesting mix of emotions at the time.
So did you get to hold the babies on the first few days?
Yeah, I held Myles first because he was more stable of the two. So I held him first, and me and my wife joke to this day because he's very clingy. He clings to me a lot to this day. And I say, I think it's because of that first contact. I held him first and the skin to skin. I think he probably subconsciously remembers that. Michael is also clingy, but not as much as Myles. And I think maybe because I got to hold Myles a lot more in the beginning. Yeah.
But that is such a wonderful story because we all know how important it is kangaroo care, and for you to have that experience with the boys and seeing the long-term impact maybe of that first moment, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
But Kojo, you told me prior that you had to go back to work and you leave Chantel and the boys in the NICU. How was that for you? Because I think that is I mean, for us, for all of us parents, I think it's very hard to leave the hospital, get discharged and go home without the babies. But not only you have to leave the hospital, but you have to go back to work and in a different, I guess in a mental state. How were you prepared to go back to work? Where was your mind? At work, at the hospital? So guide us through that moment for you.
That was a crazy time because they were born on a Friday in the middle of the night, and I went back to work on the Monday, and I worked for that whole first month that they were in the hospital until we could get things coordinated at work with a replacement. So I was back and forth for a month between the hospital and work. Luckily, my office was walking distance to Mount Sinai, thank God. Otherwise, I'm not sure how I would have did it, but my employer was very flexible and compassionate, thankfully. So I was able to attend the rounds with the doctors and the nurses every morning, and go visit at lunchtime, go back in the evening to visit and support my wife and be with the boys and help them along the way. So it was tiring. It was mentally, physically, emotionally exhausting, right? And at work, my mind was not, I was there, but I was not there. So it was a trying time. So I tried to, while I was at work, focus in on what I needed to do, but my head was not really there, and people were understanding of that. And like I said, 1 month later, I was able to take some time off and be at the hospital all day, every day. But that first month was really, really challenging.
Wow. You mentioned in the beginning you were able to go there for rounds. How else did you get involved in the care of the boys in the NICU? What were you able to do when you were there?
I got involved in every way possible. The kangaroo care, so the skin to skin, the changing diapers when we were able to, talking to the boys, singing to the boys. And then later on, they started teaching us how to bathe them. So any way I could get involved, I was in there. And that's thanks to the integrated family care approach that the NIC uses at Mount Sinai. It's a really good approach. It gets the family, the parents involved directly and hands-on. So I took advantage of that to participate, get my hands dirty, literally and figuratively. And it's not always a pretty process, but as a parent and a parent of preemies, you do whatever you have to do to help them along their recovery process and their development process. So I participated also in the workshops and the sessions that they put on for the parents. They had veteran parents come back to talk to us, so I participated in those, and I asked a ton of questions. And like I mentioned before, with the rounds with the doctors and the nurses, so everything, whatever I could get involved in, I was there.
So did you start feeling like a purpose to be there? Did you start to feel like a dad in those moments? Because you mentioned at the beginning that you didn't really feel like a father. So being involved, did it help you to find that role?
Definitely. Over time, as you get to touch them and talk to them and be with them, you start to feel more and more like a parent. You still don't, at least for me, I didn't 100% feel like a father in the NICU until the later stages and when we came home. But it was interesting to observe the boys because the nurses and the doctors told us, talk to them, sing to them as much as you can, because they're going to start to recognize your voice and they're going to know who mommy and daddy are. And I was like, come on, are you kidding me? They're just, a few days old, a week old, a couple weeks old. How are they going to know who's who, right? But they were right. They started to respond. And I remember when they opened their eyes and they looked at you, they looked at me for the first time. I was like, wow, did you see that? And they start to, turn and look and they recognize their voice. So they were totally right. And the more they responded, the more I was encouraged to talk and sing to them.
Yeah, that is wonderful. So when you were there, did you feel supported and welcomed by the NICU staff, by the doctors, by the nurses? Did you feel as a dad that you have that support that you needed?
100%. And from the first moment we walked onto the floor, the doctors were actually doing their rounds, the evening rounds, and they were at our room with our boys. And they were speaking in their doctor terminology, and we didn't know what the heck they were talking about, right? But they welcomed us with smiles and said, we know you don't understand what we're talking about, but give us some time and you're gonna understand perfectly what we're talking about. And they said, any questions, let us know. And they meant that. And we asked anything we wanted to ask, and there was no such thing as a silly question. And like I said, they provided the workshops and the learning sessions, and we attended all of those. And they had separate meetings if we wanted to meet separately. We had those personal one-on-one meetings as well. And they were so helpful. Like, we actually felt a part of the team. I felt a part of the team. And the support there is unbelievable.
That is so wonderful to hear. Tell me about your family and friends, because I talk to a lot of parents, and even from my own experience, it's very hard for families and friends to understand what's happening in the NICU and to share that. Did you feel supported by friends and families, or you found more support from peers, the people who were, other families who were in the hospital with you at the same time?
Yeah, we felt supported. It was difficult because every family is different, and my wife and I, we instituted our own policy and said, look, we're not going to allow any family or friends to come visit the boys, as difficult as that was to do. But we said we can't take any chances. So we said we tried to explain as best as we could, verbally. I remember we even drafted an email, kind of a letter to family and friends to say, look, this is what's happening, and we'd like to just limit, the number of people who see them to just me and Chantel. And people were understanding of that for the most part. Some people couldn't really understand it. And it's something that you can't really, and you would know this too, you can't really understand it unless you're in it. Even if you know someone who's been through it, it's not the same as living it every day for months. It's hard to explain it in writing or in words. You have to live it and feel it. So some people, I don't think really understood, because there were some questions of why can't we see them, or when can we see them, and it was tough to answer those questions. So we just tried to hold people off as best as we could, but we appreciated the concern, right? And people were, cooking meals for us, which is really helpful from time to time, checking in on us, which was helpful. So, but we're so busy, and you'll know this as well. You're so busy and drained and exhausted that it's hard to keep in contact with people all the time. But we did feel that support while we were in the hospital.
Wow. So you had a different experience than a lot of parents, because one of your twins was discharged before the other twin, 51 days apart, which is quite a lot when you're talking about an NICU. How you and Chantel cope with that time? How did you cope with that time, having one baby at home and one is still in the hospital?
Wow, that was a whole nother roller coaster. So we finally got into, we were spending 10, 12 hours a day in the NICU every day for 3 months by that point. So Myles came home first at the beginning of May, and I scheduled my return to work. So I had taken time off, and I scheduled my time to return to work by the end of May. So I figured, okay, they'll both come home beginning of May. I'll have an entire month at home with them, and then I'll go back to work. But, Michael threw a wrench in the plans. So Myles came home and Michael stayed back. And that was wild, because it was like we're starting all over again after we kind of got our rhythm. So we had to bring Myles home, and then my wife had to stay with Myles. And I was going back and forth to the hospital to be with Michael. And then I had to go back to work. So that got pretty wild too. So we started bringing Myles. They said we could bring Myles to the hospital to visit on the weekends. But what happened was my wife started feeling that withdrawal anxiety, right? So what was happening was I was going to work, go to the hospital at lunchtime, visit with Michael, do the rounds, and then go back to work, go back to the hospital in the evening, play with Michael, bathe him, sing with him. And this is till maybe 9, 10 at night. Come home, give Chantel a break from Myles, because she's been with Myles all day. You let her rest, and then I'm up. Myles is feeding through the night, and he's crying and so forth. So I wasn't really sleeping. I was taking naps, maybe 2 hours, and then I'd get up and go to work the next day and do it all over again. So I was doing that for about, I'd say, 2-3 months, and it became dangerous, because I was driving and falling asleep on the road. And I went back to my employer and I said, look, this is exhausting. I can't keep going at this pace. I'm at work all day, back and forth to the hospital. It's becoming a safety issue. It's a health and safety issue now. Again, they were compassionate, they were flexible, so I took more time off. Thank God I did. And then I was able to be at home with both of the boys when Michael returned home. He came home at the end of June. So it was almost 2 full months of one in the hospital and one at home. So it was a real balancing act. And I had to do a lot during that time. You're talking about going to work, groceries, helping Chantel, supporting her at home, because the emotions are all over the place, right? So it was a very demanding time for me and exhausting. And I remember the first and only time that I cried in the whole process was when Myles came home. And it was because I couldn't figure out, I was like, why am I breaking down? I'm crying. And like crying. I haven't cried like that since I was a kid, I think. And I think it was because it was a bittersweet moment. I looked at Myles, I'm holding Myles, and I'm looking at him, at his face, and I'm thinking, he made it. He made it home. He's alive. And at the same time, so there's happiness there, but at the same time, Michael's still there. He's not out of the woods yet. So I think those two things came together, and the emotions just hit. So that time of one there and one home was I can laugh now, but at the time it wasn't so funny. It was exhausting and draining, and trying to explain that to people was difficult as well.
Wow, Kojo, thank you so much for sharing that with us. I think it's so very important for us to really share that those emotions are very real, right? And there's no shame in sharing them. And I think when we share those emotions, those feelings, we really help other families. And at the same time, it's still validating our feelings because they are very real and very intense. So thank you so much for sharing that with us.
No problem.
So I want to ask you, when you're in the NICU with the boys, what were your main concerns? What were you worried about, or what you were expecting? What were those days for you that we can share with other dads?
I think the main concern was keeping them alive. That was number one priority, was just keeping them alive. And we were so focused. I remember telling our social worker, she was so helpful through the whole process with paperwork and getting all of these things arranged for us. I remember telling her that we were laser focused, so we were ready and willing to do whatever we needed to do, long days, short nights. We were just ready to do what we needed to do. And we knew that if we treated it as a learning process. So we were like sponges. We asked so many questions. We were at all the rounds. We were asking the nurses questions. We were getting involved. And we knew if we just kept doing the right thing, one step at a time, one day at a time, the rest would take care of itself. So each day we would go in there by 7:30, 8 a.m. and say, okay, let's just do the best we can do today to help them, whatever that is. And then the next day was the same thing. Let's just do the best we can do today. And we knew one day at a time. We weren't looking too far ahead. We weren't concerning ourselves with the end result. We knew if we did the best we could, whether it was a good or bad result, we could live with the results. And it worked out well. But I think the number one concern was just keeping them alive and healthy.
So this is strategy of taking one day at a time. Is this what helped you the most to cope in the NICU, with the NICU?
Yeah, I think it's maybe not just one thing. Definitely that approach of being curious, wanting to learn one day at a time. That mindset really helped myself and my wife get through the whole thing. And also we're a faithful couple. So we believe in Christ, and we go to church, and they offer a chaplain and church services at the hospital there at Mount Sinai. So our social worker informed of us of this. We went, I think it was every Wednesday, we would go at lunchtime to the church service. And then we had the chaplain come to pray with us in our room sometimes, especially when Michael, I didn't tell you about this part, Michael had a PDA ligation where he had to go to sick kids, and they had to operate on him to close off. There was something internal near the heart that needed to be manually closed because the medication wasn't working. So we had the chaplain come and pray with us before he went for surgery. And I think, that really helped us as well, the church services and all the support of the staff, the nurses, the doctors, and then the other families that were there too. There's a parent lounge where you can go and you have your informal conversations and so forth. I think that helped me a lot to have some relationships formed inside of the NICU, so that you don't feel so isolated, especially as a man, as a father. It's a female dominated environment. So you go in there and you don't see many men around. It's usually women there most of the day. And to be able to interact with some of the other fathers, I found to be very helpful as well.
That is wonderful, wonderful to hear that. So, how can we engage more fathers? This is a question that we always have. How can you bring more dads out and to talk to each other? It's a challenge, I think, not only for us in Canada, but I talk to a lot of different parent organizations from all over the world, and I think we face the same, the same situation of not being able to effectively engage dads.
Yeah, I think one thing that comes to mind is the mothers have their pump room, and they go in there pumping their milk and so forth. And that's kind of a space for them to interact informally. Even though they're there in that room to pump, they end up having conversations and interacting with each other. The men don't really have a space like that. There's the parent lounge, but it's mixed with families and visitors and people coming and going. It's not really a space for just men. So if there's a way to create that kind of space, I don't know how, I don't have the answer, but if there's a way to create that kind of space, I think that would go a long way, because the men are experiencing the NICU process an entirely different way, right? The whole, like, we can't feel what you're feeling as a woman. We can't give birth. We can't breastfeed. So we're there for support. Then we're going through a whole different process, and it can feel isolating sometimes and lonely. So if you can find a way to create a space for men to get together, fathers to get together, that would be, if the hospital can figure that out, that would be amazing.
Oh, that is a great suggestion. Definitely, we have to keep that in mind, Kojo, and bring you to some committees to express that, because I think that is very, very important. Yeah, and you right? Because there is room for improvement, and there is a place that is have to be to, gather together and talk about different issues that, yes, we moms have for sure. So I have one more question for you. A few more questions actually, but going home with both boys, how was your life as a family the first year at home? Did you face new challenges? There were more appointments. How was that first year?
It was a new set of challenges. It was, like you mentioned, appointments, steady follow-up appointments, multiple rounds of administering medication. I think they were on 4 or 5 different medications when they first came home. So we had to administer that times 2 every day, and it's just exhausting. And sometimes they don't want to take it, right? So you're fighting with them to take the medication, and you're hustling to get them in the car to go to their appointments. And you're going downtown Toronto for the appointments, and you're battling traffic and trying to figure out parking, and you're stressed because you don't want to be late. And it's like a rat race. You're just constantly going. And both of them are, they're very young at that stage, right? So they're still fussy and crying, and you're trying to figure out what they're saying to you sometimes. But, our perspective was always positive, because we said, hey, at least they're crying. We kind of laughed to ourselves when we would hear parents of singletons, totally healthy, complaining about the kid crying, or they're upset or they're fussy, and we're like, you got to be kidding. We got 2 and they got medical issues, and we're happy that they're crying because they're breathing. So it changes your perspective huge, and you would know that too, going through the NICU. You appreciate the little things.
Absolutely, it is very true. So they are what, 3 or 3.5 now?
Yeah, 3.5. Yeah, they're napping now.
How is life now, Kojo? Tell us a little bit, how is that life for you with I guess very busy with 3.5-year-old boys?
Yeah, I mean, it's, like I said, a new set of challenges now. They're toddlers, and they're talking a lot, and they're able to think more for themselves. And now we're dealing with the temper tantrums, but that's a normal thing. And I think we've reached a place of normalcy right now, although now we're dealing with COVID-19. So now we're at home working from home with them, and we're working, and we're parents, and we're teachers, and we're doing all of these things at the same time in the house with them. But we value the time together, and we appreciate the time together. And even though it's not really a normal time in the world, uh, it's a good experience for us because we get to spend a lot more time with them, and teach them and laugh with them and play with them. And we sometimes look at them and look at each other, and we're like, wow. I was looking at pictures of them this morning from the NICU, and at that time we couldn't see how we would reach this point in time. It's hard to see it when you're in the NICU and you're seeing families come and go, and you're like, are we ever going to reach that stage of normalcy? And I think we have at this point.
Wow, it's wonderful. It's wonderful to hear from you and hear your words or your perspective on all of this. And you're absolutely right. I think the NICU does give us a different perspective and make us more resilient. And even now coping with this pandemic, it gave us a different perspective, you know, having the kids at home, and just blessed that they are home despite the fact that we are exhausted, and sometimes we are doing Zoom calls and they come into the room and make noise. But yes, I think we, inside all of us and NICU parents, we have that gratitude that, you know, many of us were fortunate to bring our kids home. And I think that is a true gift for all of us. So I want you to give one final message to all the dads who are in the NICU right now. I cannot even imagine the extra layer of stress that this pandemic has put in those families right now. We've been talking to a lot of them, and you know it's been very, very difficult. What can you tell those dads who are there, or the families who are transitioning to home in the middle of the pandemic right now?
I would say do the best you can and try not to beat yourself up. Your baby or your babies are depending on you for support and your love, and they can feel it, they can sense it. So I would say do the best you can, try to be as supportive as possible, and one day at a time. One day at a time is what worked for us, and everybody's a little bit different, but if you just focus and fall in love with the process, the end results will take care of itself. Just fall in love with the process. Try to learn as much as you can, and I think the rest will take care of itself.
Kojo, thank you so much. It was lovely talking to you. I wish you and your family all the best today in your Father's Day, but every single day of the year. Thank you, and I hope I will see you again at the foundation. I'm volunteering you to do some work with us because it's always great to have a father's perspective. So thank you, Kojo.
Thank you, Fabiana, for having me. I appreciate it. It was a pleasure.
So thank you everyone for watching us here today. Just a reminder, every Monday and Friday, 1 p.m. Eastern Time, we have a Facebook Live with different clinicians and parents from all over Canada. And on Wednesdays, Kate Robson, who is a psychotherapist and also mom of 2 preemie girls, she hosts a real-time peer support group. And to join the group, you can join the Canadian Preemie Parent Support Network, which is our private Facebook group. And you can always send us an email or send a private message here on Facebook with any topic that you're interested in, and you're going to try to get experts to answer all your questions and concerns. Thank you, everyone, and be well.